The sun hung high in the sky, casting golden rays over the sprawling palace grounds. It was a picturesque scene, one that attracted visitors from every corner of the globe. The air buzzed with excitement as families, couples, and solo travelers wandered through the historic site, snapping photos and marveling at its architectural beauty. Among the throngs of tourists stood Marcus, a middle-aged man visiting from another country. He had saved up for months to make this trip happen, dreaming of capturing memories he could share with friends back home. Marcus wasn't just any tourist. He prided himself on being someone who planned everything meticulously. From booking flights to mapping out each day's itinerary, he left nothing to chance. But today, something unexpected happened, something that would throw all his careful planning into disarray. As he strolled along the cobblestone paths, admiring the intricate details of the palace walls, he noticed a group of people gathered near an imposing iron gate. Curious, he moved closer, only to find a cluster of royal guards standing tall and silent, their uniforms immaculate and commanding attention. These guards were part of a long-standing tradition, tasked with protecting not only the physical space, but also the dignity and heritage of the monarchy. Their presence was both awe-inspiring and intimidating, a living symbol of history and discipline. One particular guard caught Marcus's eye. This was Private James, whose posture was so rigid it seemed almost unnatural. His face remained expressionless, betraying no hint of emotion despite the constant hum of activity around him. Tourists whispered among themselves, pointing cameras discreetly while trying not to disturb the solemn atmosphere. But there was a sign posted nearby, a clear warning, written in multiple languages. No photography allowed beyond this point. Marcus frowned when he saw it. To him, this rule felt arbitrary and unfair. After all, he had traveled thousands of miles to see this place, and now he was being told he couldn't document it fully. Frustration bubbled inside him as he muttered, under his breath, "Why do they have to be so strict? It's just a picture." Unbeknownst to Marcus, Private James heard fragments of his complaints. Though trained never to react emotionally, James couldn't help but feel a flicker of irritation. These rules weren't created lightly. They existed to preserve the sanctity of the palace and protect sensitive areas from unnecessary exposure. Still, James reminded himself of his duty: remain calm, composed, and professional at all times. So he simply adjusted his stance slightly, ensuring his position made it clear where the restricted area began. As Marcus lingered near the boundary, torn between obeying the rules and indulging his desire to take a photo, tension simmered beneath the surface. Other tourists glanced nervously between him and the guards, sensing the brewing conflict. A young couple nearby exchanged worried looks, whispering about how someone should intervene before things escalated. Meanwhile, children tugged at their parents' sleeves, eager to move on to the next attraction without realizing the drama unfolding around them. What Marcus didn't understand, or perhaps chose to ignore, was the significance of the guards' role. They weren't mere obstacles preventing him from taking a souvenir photo. Each guard carried years of training, discipline, and pride in representing their nation. For Private James, standing motionless for hours on end wasn't just a job, it was a calling. Every glance, every movement, and every decision he made reflected not only on himself, but also on the institution he served. Yet, none of this mattered to Marcus in that moment. All he could focus on was his growing annoyance. The more he thought about the restriction, the angrier he became. What right did anyone have to tell him what he could or couldn't photograph? Wasn't he entitled to enjoy his vacation however he pleased? These questions swirled in his mind, fueling his frustration until it reached a boiling point. Little did Marcus realize, his actions in the next few minutes would change the course of his entire trip and teach him a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. As Marcus stood near the restricted area, his irritation continued to grow. He glanced at the sign again, its bold letters glaring back at him like a personal affront. No photography allowed beyond this point seemed less like a guideline and more like a challenge. To him, it wasn't just about taking a picture, it was about asserting his right to do as he pleased. After all, hadn't he paid for this trip? Hadn't he traveled halfway across the world to experience this moment? The rules felt arbitrary, almost insulting, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being treated unfairly. Private James, meanwhile, remained steadfast in his position. His eyes scanned the crowd methodically, ensuring everyone adhered to the guidelines. When he noticed Marcus inch closer to the boundary with his camera raised, James stepped forward ever so slightly. Without uttering a word, he extended one gloved hand, a subtle yet firm gesture signaling that photography was prohibited beyond this point. His movements were deliberate, calculated, and deeply rooted in years of training. Every action he took was designed to uphold order while maintaining respect for the palace's traditions. But Marcus wasn't deterred. Instead of backing down, he let out an exasperated sigh loud enough for those nearby to hear. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, shaking his head. His voice carried a tone of defiance, drawing attention from other tourists who had been quietly observing the exchange. Some exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tension building between the two men. Others shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene or simply stay out of it. Ignoring James's silent warning, Marcus lifted his camera once more. He aimed it toward the restricted area, framing the shot as if daring the guard to stop him. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. James hesitated, weighing his options carefully. Protocol dictated that he maintain composure under any circumstances, but there was also a line, a boundary beyond which disrespect could not go unanswered. With measured steps, James moved directly into Marcus's line of sight, blocking his view entirely. The audacity of the guard's actions ignited a spark of fury within Marcus. How dare this man stand in his way? Who did he think he was? In Marcus's mind, the situation escalated from a minor inconvenience to a full-blown confrontation. His face flushed red, his hands clenched tightly around the camera, and his breathing grew heavier. The frustration that had simmered beneath the surface finally boiled over. "Move," Marcus barked, his voice sharp and commanding. But James didn't flinch. His expression remained impassive, betraying no hint of emotion. To him, this wasn't personal. It was professional. He was doing his job, protecting the integrity of the palace and the rules that governed it. Yet, to Marcus, the guard's stoic demeanor only added fuel to the fire. It felt dismissive, even mocking, as though James believed himself superior. And then, in a split second, Marcus made a decision that would alter everything. Reaching down, he scooped up a handful of sand from the path below. Without hesitation, he hurled it straight at James, aiming squarely for his face. The grains caught the sunlight briefly before landing with shocking force, scattering across James's cheeks and eyes. For a moment, the guard staggered backward, momentarily blinded by the unexpected attack. His perfectly maintained composure wavered as he instinctively raised his hands to shield his face. Gasps rippled through the crowd like waves crashing against a shore. Tourists froze mid-step, their cameras lowered, mouths agape. Children clung to their parents, wide-eyed and confused. Even the other guards stationed nearby turned their heads sharply, startled by the sudden commotion. What had started as a quiet disagreement between a tourist and a guard had erupted into chaos, disrupting the serene atmosphere of the palace grounds. James blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision as grit clung stubbornly to his eyelashes. Despite the discomfort, he forced himself to remain calm. Years of discipline kicked in, reminding him that reacting impulsively would only worsen the situation. Slowly, he straightened his posture, regaining his balance and composure. Though shaken, he refused to let the incident rattle him completely. His training had prepared him for moments like this, moments when patience and professionalism were tested to their limits. Marcus, however, appeared oblivious to the gravity of what he had done. Standing there with his chest heaving and fists still clenched, he looked around defiantly as if daring anyone to challenge him. But the expressions on the faces surrounding him told a different story. Instead of admiration or support, he saw shock, disapproval, and even disgust. Some tourists whispered amongst themselves, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others quickly snapped photos or videos of the scene, capturing the aftermath of Marcus's reckless act. It was only then that reality began to sink in for Marcus. As the initial rush of anger subsided, he realized the magnitude of what he had just done. Assaulting a royal guard wasn't merely a breach of etiquette. It was a serious offense with consequences far greater than he had anticipated. Panic flickered in his eyes as he glanced at the crowd, searching for any sign of sympathy, but none came. The weight of his actions pressed heavily upon him, leaving him stranded in a sea of judgmental stares. Within moments, other guards rushed to assist James, forming a protective barrier around him. One of them gently guided him away from the scene, offering words of reassurance as they led him to a safe spot where he could clean his eyes properly. Meanwhile, another guard approached Marcus, his tone authoritative yet controlled. "Sir, please step aside," he instructed, gesturing toward a quieter area away from the crowd. Marcus hesitated, his mind racing as he tried to process what was happening. The mood had shifted dramatically. Gone was the cheerful buzz of excited tourists exploring the palace grounds. In its place lingered an air of unease, punctuated by hushed conversations and nervous glances. Marcus followed the guard reluctantly, his heart pounding in his chest. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by guilt and regret. He knew he had crossed a line, but how far had he gone? And what would happen next? As the crowd dispersed, and the dust settled, both literally and figuratively, the incident left an indelible mark on everyone present. For Marcus, it marked the beginning of a journey he hadn't planned for. For James, it reinforced the importance of his role and the sacrifices it sometimes demanded. And for the witnesses, it served as a stark reminder of the power of emotions and the consequences of letting them spiral out of control. Within minutes of the shocking incident, the tranquil atmosphere of the palace grounds transformed into a scene of controlled urgency. Word spread quickly among the royal guards, and soon, reinforcements arrived to secure the area. The once curious crowd of tourists began to disperse, some reluctantly dragging their feet while others hurried away, eager to distance themselves from the unfolding drama. Marcus, still standing awkwardly near the restricted zone, found himself surrounded by guards who now wore expressions far less forgiving than before. One of the senior officers stepped forward, his demeanor calm but firm. "Sir, we need you to come with us," he said, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for argument. Marcus hesitated, glancing around as if searching for an escape route or perhaps a sympathetic face in the crowd. But there was none. The same people who had moments ago been snapping photos of the palace were now capturing images of him, images that would later flood social media and news outlets, immortalizing his reckless act. As the officer gestured for Marcus to follow, he complied reluctantly, his step slow and heavy, his mind raced with questions. What would happen next? Would he be arrested? Fined? Deported? The uncertainty gnawed at him, making his stomach churn. As they led him toward a nearby security office, Marcus noticed that several tourists were being questioned by other guards. Some held up their phones showing videos they had recorded of the altercation. Others recounted what they had seen, their voices tinged with disbelief and disapproval. Inside the small, dimly lit room, Marcus was asked to sit down. Across the table sat two local law enforcement officers, their uniforms crisp and their expressions unreadable. They introduced themselves briefly before launching into a series of questions. "Can you explain what happened out there?" one of them asked, leaning slightly forward. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but found himself struggling to find the right words. How could he justify throwing sand at a guard? It sounded absurd even to him now. "Well," he began hesitantly, "I was just trying to take a picture. I didn't think it was such a big deal." The officers exchanged quick glances but said nothing, allowing him to continue. "The guard kept blocking me, and I got frustrated. I know, I shouldn't have done it, but it all happened so fast." His explanation fell flat even to his own ears. He tried to emphasize how unfair he thought the photography restrictions were, hoping to garner some sympathy. But the officers remained unmoved, jotting notes down on their notepads without offering any reassurance. One of them finally spoke up, his tone measured but stern. "Sir, assaulting a member of the Royal Guard is a serious offense. These individuals are tasked with protecting not only this site, but also its cultural significance. Their role is not something to be taken lightly." Marcus swallowed hard, the weight of those words sinking in deeper with each passing second. He had always known that guards played an important role, but he hadn't fully grasped the gravity of disrespecting them until now. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. What he had dismissed as a minor disagreement was actually a violation of deeply ingrained laws and traditions. Meanwhile, outside the security office, Private James was receiving medical attention. Though he had initially refused help, insisting he was fine, his commanding officer insisted on ensuring his well-being. A medic gently cleaned the sand from his eyes, asking if he needed further treatment. James shook his head, his pride refusing to let him admit weakness. "I'm okay," he said softly, though his voice carried a hint of strain. Despite his outward composure, the incident had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Being attacked while performing his duty wasn't something he had ever anticipated, and it left him questioning whether he could have handled the situation differently. Back in the security office, the officers informed Marcus of the charges against him. Assaulting a royal guard was no small matter. It carried legal consequences that extended beyond a simple apology. They explained that he would likely face fines, possible jail time, and potentially even a ban from returning to the country. Each piece of information landed like a hammer blow, chipping away at Marcus's confidence. He tried to argue, claiming that his actions were impulsive and that he hadn't meant any real harm. But the evidence stacked against him, the videos, the witness statements, and the undeniable fact that he had thrown sand directly at James, made his excuses sound hollow. As the questioning continued, Marcus grew increasingly agitated. "Look, I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice rising slightly. "But isn't this overkill? I mean, it's just sand." The officers exchanged another glance, this one tinged with frustration. One of them leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "Sir, it's not about the sand itself. It's about the principle. Guards like Private James represent centuries of tradition and service. When you attack one of them, you're attacking the values they stand for. That's why this is being treated so seriously." The word struck a nerve. Marcus slumped in his seat, his bravado crumbling under the weight of accountability. For the first time since the incident, he allowed himself to truly reflect on his actions. Had his anger blinded him to the bigger picture? Was he so focused on his own frustration that he failed to see the impact of his behavior? The answers were painfully clear, and they filled him with a mix of shame and regret. By the time the officers finished their initial investigation, news of the altercation had spread far beyond the palace grounds. Social media platforms buzzed, with activity as users shared videos and photos of the incident. Comment sections erupted with debates, with some defending Marcus's frustration over restrictive rules and others condemning his violent reaction. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about respecting authority and cultural norms. Headlines like "Tourist Assaults Royal Guard in Fit of Rage" dominated feeds, painting Marcus as the villain in a narrative he never intended to star in. Despite the mounting pressure, Marcus was eventually allowed to leave the security office. But only temporarily. He was released on the condition that he remain available for further questioning and legal proceedings. As he stepped outside, blinking in the bright sunlight, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. Yet, it was short-lived. The stares of lingering tourists and the knowledge that his face might soon appear online or in newspapers weighed heavily on him. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if guilt itself were dragging him down. As the day wore on, Marcus retreated to his hotel room, seeking refuge from the judgmental eyes of strangers. Sitting alone on the edge of his bed, he replayed the events in his mind, analyzing every decision that had led him to this point. He thought about the sign prohibiting photography, the guard's unwavering stance, and the moment he lost control. Most of all, he thought about the look on James's face. Not anger or retaliation, but quiet resilience. It was a look that haunted him, reminding him of the dignity and discipline he had so callously disregarded. For Marcus, the hours following the incident were a blur of reflection and dread. He knew that whatever happened next, whether it involved court appearances, fines, or public apologies, he would carry the lessons of this day for the rest of his life. And though he couldn't undo what he had done, he vowed silently to himself that he would never let anger cloud his judgment again. The hours that followed the incident felt like an eternity for Marcus. Back in his hotel room, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the floor. His mind replayed every detail of what had happened: the frustration, the impulsive decision, the horrified reactions of the crowd. Each memory was sharper than the last, and with it came a fresh wave of shame. He couldn't escape the image of Private James standing steadfast, even after being attacked. That look of quiet resilience haunted him more than anything else. As evening approached, Marcus decided to turn on the television, hoping to distract himself from his racing thoughts. But instead of finding relief, he was met with breaking news coverage. The story of his altercation with the Royal Guard dominated the headlines. News anchors described the incident in vivid detail, showing clips of the chaos captured by tourists' phones. One video in particular seemed to have gone viral, a shaky recording of Marcus scooping up sand and hurling it at James. The footage was grainy but unmistakable, and there was no denying who the perpetrator was. Social media wasn't any kinder. Platforms lit up with hashtags and memes mocking Marcus's behavior. Some posts criticized him harshly, calling him disrespectful and entitled. Others poked fun at the absurdity of using sand as a weapon, turning the moment into internet fodder. A few comments expressed sympathy, suggesting that the rules about photography might indeed be frustrating. But these voices were drowned out by the overwhelming tide of negativity. Marcus scrolled through the posts reluctantly, each one driving home just how public his humiliation had become. He tried to rationalize the situation, telling himself that people would forget about it eventually. After all, scandals like this came and went every day. But deep down he knew this was different. This wasn't just some random argument, it involved a symbol of national pride, a royal guard. And while Marcus could brush off online ridicule, the legal consequences looming ahead were far more serious. The row. Next morning, Marcus received a summons to appear before a local magistrate. Dressed in the most formal attire he had packed, he made his way to the courthouse, dreading what awaited him. As he entered the building, reporters swarmed around him, shoving microphones in his face and shouting questions. "Why did you throw sand at the guard?" one demanded. "Do you regret your actions?" Another pressed. Flashes from cameras blinded him momentarily, and he hurried inside, keeping his head low to avoid further attention. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Marcus took a seat beside his court-appointed lawyer, a young woman named Clara who exuded calm professionalism despite the gravity of the case. She had spent the previous night reviewing the evidence and preparing a defense strategy. Leaning close, she whispered reassurances to Marcus. "Stay composed," she advised. "We'll get through this." When the judge entered the room, everyone stood respectfully. The proceedings began with the prosecution presenting their case. They outlined the events leading up to the altercation, highlighting Marcus's refusal to comply with the photography restrictions and his eventual assault on Private James. Witnesses were called to testify, including several tourists who had been present during the incident. Their accounts painted a damning picture of Marcus as someone who had let his emotions override reason. One witness, a middle-aged woman holding her phone nervously, recounted how Marcus had muttered angrily under his breath before escalating the situation. Another, a teenage boy, described seeing Marcus scoop up the sand and throw it without hesitation. Even the medic who treated James testified, explaining the potential risks of sand entering the eyes and emphasizing the seriousness of the act. Every word spoken added another layer of weight to Marcus's shoulders. Finally, it was Clara's turn to speak. Rising to her feet, she addressed the court with poise. "Your Honor," she began, My client acknowledges that his actions were wrong and deeply regrets the harm caused. However, we must consider the context here. Mr. Marcus is a first-time offender who acted out of frustration, not malice. He has expressed sincere remorse and understands the gravity of disrespecting cultural norms and authority figures. Clara then turned to Marcus, signaling for him to stand. Taking a deep breath, Marcus faced the judge. His voice trembled as he spoke. Your Honor, I want to apologize sincerely for my behavior. I understand now that what I did was unacceptable. I allowed my anger to get the better of me, and I failed to respect the rules and the people enforcing them. If given the chance, I promise to learn from this experience and ensure it never happens again. The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable. After a brief pause, he delivered his verdict. Marcus was found guilty of assaulting a royal guard and ordered to pay a substantial fine. Additionally, he was banned from returning to the country for 5 years. While avoiding jail time was a relief, the financial penalty and travel restriction hit hard. The judge also emphasized the importance of respecting cultural heritage and authority, reminding Marcus and everyone else in the room that traditions like those upheld by the royal guards deserved reverence, not hostility. Leaving the courthouse, Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, he was grateful that the ordeal was over and that he wouldn't face imprisonment. On the other hand, the reality of his punishment sank in, leaving him overwhelmed with regret. Reporters still lingered outside, eager for a statement, but Marcus ignored them, walking briskly toward a waiting taxi. As the car pulled away, he glanced back at the courthouse, feeling as though he were leaving behind not only the scene of his trial, but also a part of himself. That night, alone in his hotel room once again, Marcus reflected on everything that had transpired. He thought about the countless hours spent planning this trip, the excitement of exploring new places, and the joy of capturing memories. Now, those dreams felt tainted, overshadowed by his own recklessness. He picked up his camera, running his fingers over its smooth surface. It had been the source of so much trouble, yet it also represented the beauty he had hoped to preserve. Setting it aside, he opened his laptop and began drafting a letter of apology to Private James. In the letter, Marcus poured out his heart, expressing genuine remorse for his actions and acknowledging the dignity James had shown throughout the ordeal. I hope someday you can forgive me, he wrote, signing off with a simple, sincerely. Though he doubted the letter would change anything, writing it gave him a small sense of closure. As dawn broke the following day, Marcus packed his bags, preparing to leave the city and the country behind. Stepping outside, he noticed the palace in the distance, its grandeur undiminished by the events of the past few days. For a moment he paused, taking in the sight one last time. Then, with a heavy sigh, he climbed into the taxi and drove away, vowing never to let anger dictate his choices again. Though the journey had ended far differently than he imagined, Marcus knew it had taught him invaluable lessons about patience, humility, and respect. And as painful as the experience had been, he understood that sometimes growth comes from our greatest mistakes. The taxi ride to the airport was quiet, almost eerily so. Marcus sat in the back seat staring out the window as the cityscape blurred past him. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, regret, shame, and a lingering sense of disbelief that this trip had spiraled so far from what he had envisioned. The streets were alive with activity, but Marcus felt disconnected from it all, as if an invisible wall separated him from the world outside. Every honk of a car horn or chatter of pedestrians seemed distant, muffled by the weight of his thoughts. At the airport, Marcus went through the motions mechanically. He checked in his luggage, cleared security, and found his gate. But even amid the bustling crowds, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Was it paranoia, or were people actually recognizing him? He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact, clutching his boarding pass tightly as if it were a lifeline leading him away from everything that had gone wrong. As he waited for his flight to be called, Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled absent-mindedly through social media. Predictably, the incident was still making waves online. New articles dissected every angle of the story, while memes continued to circulate, mocking his actions. Some commenters speculated about how much the fine must have cost him, while others gleefully pointed out the irony of someone traveling to experience culture, only to disrespect it so blatantly. Each post felt like a fresh wound, reopening the guilt and embarrassment he had been trying to suppress. But amidst the negativity, Marcus stumbled upon something unexpected, a thread where people were discussing the importance of respecting cultural norms and traditions. One commenter wrote, "It's easy to get frustrated when things don't go our way, but we should always remember that places like these are more than just tourist attractions. They're symbols of history and identity." Another added, "We're guests in these countries and acting entitled doesn't help anyone." Reading those words hit Marcus harder than any insult ever could. It wasn't anger or mockery. It was a simple reminder of perspective, something he had sorely lacked during his confrontation with Private James. For the first time since the incident, Marcus allowed himself to truly consider what it meant to be a visitor in another country. He realized now that he hadn't approached his travels with the respect and gratitude they deserved. Instead, he had treated them as transactions, as though paying for a ticket entitled him to bend the rules however he pleased. When the announcement came over the intercom that his flight was boarding, Marcus felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief, because he was finally leaving behind the place where his worst mistake had occurred. Dread, because he knew the lessons of this trip would stay with him forever. As he settled into his seat on the plane, he gazed out the window at the tarmac. Below, the engines roared to life, and soon the aircraft was ascending into the sky, carrying him farther and farther away from the palace grounds and the version of himself who had acted so recklessly. Hours later, as the plane touched down in his home country, Marcus stepped off with a heavy heart. Walking through the terminal, he noticed familiar faces greeting loved ones with smiles and hugs. Families reunited, friends embraced, and children ran excitedly toward waiting parents. Yet, Marcus walked alone, dragging his suitcase behind him. The contrast between their joy and his solitude struck him deeply. This wasn't how he had imagined returning home. Back in his apartment, Marcus unpacked slowly, each item serving as a reminder of his journey. His camera lay untouched on the dining table, its lens cap still on. He picked it up hesitantly, running his fingers over its surface. Photography had always been his passion, a way to capture beauty and preserve memories. Now it felt tainted, associated with the moment he had let his frustration boil over. Setting it aside, he decided not to take it out again until he could approach it with a clearer mindset. Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into reflection. He spent hours reading about the history of the palace and the role of royal guards in preserving cultural heritage. He learned about the centuries-old traditions that shaped the institution and why protecting those customs mattered so much to the local community. With each article and documentary he consumed, his understanding deepened, and his regret grew sharper. He began to see how narrow-minded he had been, viewing the photography restrictions as obstacles rather than protections. Determined to make amends, Marcus drafted another letter, this time addressed to the tourism board of the country he had visited. In it, he expressed his sincere apologies not only for his behavior, but also for failing to appreciate the significance of the site he had disrespected. "I understand now that my actions undermined the very thing I came to admire," he wrote. "I hope someday I can return with a better understanding and a greater respect for your culture." He also reached out to Clara, his lawyer, asking if there was any way to personally apologize to Private James. While she explained that direct contact might not be possible due to protocol, she assured him that his written apology would likely be shared with the appropriate authorities. Though it wasn't the resolution he had hoped for, Marcus felt a small measure of peace knowing he had tried. Months passed, and life gradually returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could be after such an experience. Marcus resumed his work, reconnected with friends, and even started volunteering at a local museum. Helping curate exhibits and educate visitors, gave him a renewed sense of purpose, allowing him to channel his love for exploration into something positive. He often found himself sharing stories of his ill-fated trip, not to elicit sympathy, but to emphasize the importance of patience, humility, and respect when traveling. One evening, as he sat on his couch flipping through old photo albums, Marcus paused on a picture of himself standing in front of a famous landmark years ago. Back then, he had been younger, less jaded and full of wonder. Looking at that image reminded him of the person he used to be, the person he wanted to become again. Inspired, he picked up his camera for the first time since his return. This time, instead of snapping photos carelessly, he took deliberate shots around his neighborhood, focusing on details he had overlooked before. A blooming flower here, a weathered bench there. Each frame told a story, reminding him of the beauty and simplicity. Years later, Marcus reflected on his journey with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the mistakes he had made and the opportunities he had squandered. Gratitude for the lessons he had learned and the growth that followed. Though he never returned to the palace where it all happened, he carried its memory with him wherever he went, a constant reminder of the power of respect and the consequences of losing sight of it. And perhaps, somewhere far away, Private James stood guard once more, his posture as unwavering as ever. If he thought of Marcus at all, it was likely with a quiet acknowledgement that even moments of conflict can lead to personal transformation. After all, every encounter, good or bad, has the potential to shape us in ways we may not immediately understand. For both men, the incident became a defining chapter in their lives, one that ultimately taught them the value of dignity, resilience, and second chances.